This is the Dell XPS 420, a project system that I was involved with last year. The same person that had the ThinkPad T60 also had this XPS computer that they wanted to build into an early 2000s-ish Windows Media Center computer, and I happily decided to help out. The project kind of ended up being a bit of a mixed bag, as it was pretty much pieced together with a bunch of random parts that were already laying around here and that were cheap on eBay. So what is the XPS 420? And yes, that's actually its model number. Well, in a nutshell, this would have been Dell's highest end model that they sold back in 2007. I've already covered my Dell XPS M1530, and to me, this is kind of a desktop sibling to that machine, if you will. This is a Core 2 Duo machine with a Radeon GPU to pair, and after extra options it would have been probably about $2,000 if I remember correctly. This computer's also only ever had one owner, which is pretty cool. This is one of Dell's BTX machines, and so it's pretty big. It's also got that same black and silver color scheme going on as my M1530, though unfortunately common for a 2000s computer, this thing is absolutely littered with glossy plastic. They've also got these drive doors over the optical drives, and these custom bezels over the external 3.5-inch devices, probably to improve looks. And the top of the computer has a display. No, this thing's not an all-in-one computer. This is a Windows sideshow device. We'll, come back to this in a little while. Otherwise, this is a sticker for Intel 5, and the side panels are incredibly bare. This machine had a different power supply swapped into it, which actually doesn't fill all of the space, so there's a big gaping hole in the back of the computer. There's also surround sound audio, lots of USB ports, and even an eSATA port. And this computer has several expansion cards that were added into it, which we'll also come back to in a little while. Opening this computer, I will admit, is pretty satisfying. There's this release latch on the top of the machine, which you simply just pull back, and the side panel pops off like a car door. This is not the only time a Dell computer has had a design like this, and I have to say, I absolutely love it. What I don't love, though, is the insides of this computer. It's an absolute nightmare. And it's pretty much a nightmare for one reason, and that's that power supply, which itself was only added into this computer because it got an upgraded graphics card. At the very least, this takes a 24-pin power supply, so it can take a standard unit. But this power supply, while it is pretty beefy, it's a 600-ish watt unit, it is non-modular, which means it's got a bunch of extra just junk. Disappointingly, the original power supply was so close to being adequate, as it was like 370-ish watts, but unfortunately it did not have enough PCI Express power connectors for the GPU that went into this machine. This is a shame because the original power supply was built for this case, so there's these cable management channels along the back, but I just can't use them here. Even with that power supply removed though, there is still a lot going on here thanks to all of the front panel devices. The front 5.25-inch bays are entirely toolless at the very least. It's got another fun release mechanism with it, and they do conveniently hide some extra screws in case you need to replace any drives. Speaking of which, because there aren't enough hard drive bays in this machine, there's a couple extra drives that are just kind of thrown up here wherever they will fit. Only the optical drive is screwed into this machine. The hard drive bays are also toolless, though they are these plastic brackets which are prone to breaking. You can kind of see how it was supposed to work on this other one. Interestingly, one of these cages is riveted to the chassis, the other could be unscrewed and removed. And this is the only place that you can actually mount hard drives. There is nowhere else in this entire computer, despite it being massive, for you to mount hard drives. And these caddies cannot be mounted on top of one of each other like, say, an Optiplex computer. Also, because the hard drive bays are so far away from the SATA ports, the cables have to be so long, I'd almost argue they're basically proprietary. Now, next to the hard drive bays would be the expansion cards, none of which are original. Let's start with the GPU, an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 460, which was put in here because it was laying around and the original GPU died years ago. It's a pretty good GPU for this machine, but like I said, it does not work with the original power supply. The original graphics card also had a plastic mounting guide thing in the case, which of course is not compatible with the GPU that was put in here, and also is prone to breaking. There's also an incredibly basic wireless N card in this machine, a Creative Sound Blaster Auto G2, which just barely clears that second hard drive cage, and there's also a Hauppauge WinTV tuner card that came out of a crappy HP computer. The other thing taking up so much space in this chassis would be the cooler. There's a big old heatsink mounted inside this plastic baffle, and there's a big old fan in front of it that, yes, if you're wondering, is proprietary. In fact, this entire motherboard is so unbelievably proprietary, from the form factor itself to the layout and the connectors on the board. This entire thing is so unbelievably non-standard. It at least has plenty of expansion. There's a total of 4 RAM slots. Currently 2 are populated for a total of 4 gigs of RAM. There are 5 SATA ports on this machine, all 5 of which are occupied with hard drives as well as a solid state drive and an optical drive. This area also houses the connectors for all of the various front panel things. There are 6 expansion slots on this machine, 3 PCI Express slots and 3 PCI slots, of which only one of the PCI slots is actually an X16 slot, the other is an X8 slot, and the one below that is only an X1 slot, though you can see where another X16 slot could have been. And one of the PCI slots is above that X16 slot, so if you have a dual slot GPU, you lose one of the expansion slots. Also, this machine has a floppy drive connector on it, which I find a bit strange because this was not an officially supported option on this machine. And you can also see the fan connectors, and I should say connectors, because there's actually a second fan hiding below the CPU fan. This is kind of helpful for some extra GPU cooling, but disappointingly, you can't control either of these fans. Of course, there's also the CPU socket area. This machine currently has a Core 2 Quad Q9400 in it, but could take up to a Core 2 Extreme CPU. And also because, why the hell not, there are 2 blown capacitors on this board near the chipset heatsink. And that's the highlights. This entire thing is so complicated inside. There's just so much going on to it. Now, one of the major reasons why this thing has just been swapped with so many different components is because a lot of the original parts to this computer have since died. The original RAM stopped working, the original hard drive with the original operating system on it stopped working years ago, one of the optical drives completely quit working and the other optical drive in it is problematic, and the original GPU also died. So much stuff has just been replaced on this computer over the years. Now, looping back around to the operating system, I did manage to get a somewhat OEM setup going on here. I found an XPS 420 recovery image online and used the recovery partition from my XPS M1530 to restore this thing to a factory install. Unfortunately for me, the only image I could find was in French. Because of that, there isn't really any interesting stuff on here like there would have been on the English version. As far as I'm aware, the image would have actually been quite similar to my M1530. Before I could get that working, I ended up doing my own Windows 7 install on this computer, and just kind of recreated some of the original stuff on here. Unfortunately, this install ended up being kind of a nightmare on this machine because it was surprisingly unstable. This is likely because the RAM in this computer is what I would call crap. But when it's not crashing, this computer is, dare I say, it's still kind of fast by modern standards, thanks to it having an SSD. I mean, it can play 1080p 60 YouTube, though it is working pretty hard while doing so. But there's a good chance you wouldn't even notice it happening, because one of this computer's strongest qualities, in my opinion, is for being so high-end for its time, this thing is pretty thermally efficient thanks to that big ol' cooler on it. Under most circumstances, the fan never ramps up at all and this computer makes hardly any heat. And because of that CPU and GPU combo, it seems to hold up pretty well in Cinebench R10 compared to everything else I own. And perhaps an unintended side effect is that this computer works really well for older games. Stuff from the 2000s-ish. That's not what this computer was built for necessarily, but it's pretty cool that it has that capability. It works pretty well for that, and again, because it's not running very hot, it's actually kind of a pleasant experience. I didn't test too many games on here because I only had this for a very limited amount of time, and that's not what it was going to be used for. And also, Windows XP games kind of are iffy on Windows 7 64-bit. But from the couple things I did test on here, it works pretty well. I'm sure the original Core 2 Duo and Radeon GPU combo would have been pretty good back when it was new, but I mean, this setup just clears it, if nothing else, because it's much newer. Or if that's not your thing, you could use the Media Center remote for this computer. This L remote connects to the computer with an infrared device that just plugs into one of the many USB ports on the back of this computer. And I gotta be honest, I had a lot more fun with this thing than I really thought I would. This is a pretty cool way to consume media on this computer. And because it's an infrared device, you can, in theory, control the computer with it, though it's not a mouse, so you can only do so much with it. And it also works in other programs like Dell's Media Center clone, also known as Media Direct. And it also works in VLC. Or you could use the Windows Sideshow device on the top of this computer. It's time to come back to this thing. Now, Dell calls this the XPS Mini View device. It's essentially an auxiliary device tied to your computer where you can view basic information like your email or play music on it or check photos or your calendar or something like that. It's controlled with this set of buttons on the side. The first major flaw is that there is no dedicated back button. If you want to go back, you have to hit the menu button and then scroll down to back. There's also only one thing built into it, which is an incredibly small version of Solitaire, for some reason. I was provided with a handful of gadgets for this thing, but there's a pretty big flaw with this right away, which is that this is based on Windows gadgets, something that has been discontinued for an extremely long time now. So finding things to actually install on this device is shockingly difficult. The only real things I could find were basically system monitors and very basic media viewers. And essentially every single gadget that was provided has very little utility. The other thing about this whole Sideshow thing is the computer needs to be powered on and running a compatible version of Windows for this to work. In my opinion, this defeats literally any purpose this thing could possibly serve. It'd be one thing if the computer could have been turned off and you could play music through it in some sort of low power mode, but this just can't do that. And they say you could use this thing when you're not actually using your computer, but the way I see it, if the computer has to be powered on, why would you go out of your way to use this thing when you could just use your computer? There are a handful of settings you can change on it, like the display brightness, which honestly hardly makes any difference. You can also set a pin on it, and you can change the wallpaper of it, and there are a couple Dell ones built in. Windows Sideshow was one of the many features introduced in Windows Vista. In fact, it was called Auxiliary Displays at one point in its development. And while it would stick around in Windows 7 and maybe Windows 8, it pretty much was not used in any other computer other than a couple of other examples. And in this implementation, this device just doesn't make any sense at all. Because of the button controls, it's super clunky and primitive to use, and also this display is spectacularly awful. It doesn't matter what angle I film it, it just always looks bad. But wait a minute, because I had the original install of Windows earlier, does Dell have any interesting use for this thing? Well, you know what? No, they don't. It's effectively the same kind of stuff. There's a system monitor gadget, there's a picture viewer one, this reminders one, there's also a shortcuts thing to open things on your computer from this thing. But once again, none of these gadgets here provide any value. Especially the shortcuts one, which is just opening things on your desktop. The two parties that were going to provide the most compelling argument for why this device makes sense were Dell and Microsoft, and in my opinion, neither of them have made a strong argument. I'm sure it's no surprise then that the follow-up to the XPS 420, the XPS 430, did not have this device in it. And as intriguing as it might be, 99% of the time, this thing is just powered off because it's not being used. And that is pretty much all there is to this computer. It definitely has its quirks, but I have to be honest, I just did not like working with this thing for some reason. Maybe that's why it's taken me so long to actually do something with this footage. I'm not really happy with how the project itself turned out. A lot of the expansion cards that went into this thing ended up being kind of crap. And while it works for the purpose it was intended to, it just, I don't know, working with this machine was difficult. The quality of the original parts just didn't seem good, the fact that there were so many things that went bad on this computer. And who knows how much longer this motherboard has thanks to its bad capacitors. It could also be this unit. I mean, I've had plenty of success with Dell's Optiplex machines, and normally Dell's BTX stuff is pretty good, but for whatever reason, this one just hasn't done it for me. It is worth noting that a lot of the upgraded parts that went into this computer probably could have been substituted with somewhat OEM options. It seems like these were quite customizable back when they were new, with audio and maybe even TV tuner card options, much better processors available, much better graphics and storage options available. This thing could have been pretty awesome back when it was new, even if it was going to be a lot more expensive. And even if it is a massive pain in the butt, it is still a pretty cool computer. I mean, XPS stuff normally is, after all. And I say it with a lot of things, but I still think with the right hardware, one of these has quite a bit of potential to it, even today, almost 20 years after it was manufactured.